What's up, everybody? Hockey Time here, back again with another video. Today, going to bring you guys through something a little bit different than usual. I actually do this every year, kind of off the channel, but wanted to bring it on the channel this year. I did it last year as well with Jaden on one of the podcast episodes, but wanted to do a way too early playoffs prediction. So A, who's making the playoffs, and then B, build a preseason bracket just to see how accurate it is, kind of for shits and giggles. So I'm going to be running through that today. Really quick, want to run through the results I had from last season, so you'll see those pop up on your screen now. Um, Kind of hit or miss here. I mean, I had a fair number of teams that actually made the playoffs make it. Obviously, St. Louis didn't get in there. Nashville did not get in there. Vancouver, not even close. And then the Sens didn't. The Penguins didn't. But I think everyone else got in. So from there, the matchups obviously are kind of all over the place because predicting actual seeding at the beginning of the season is pretty tough. But um, obviously, some of the big names that either didn't make it out of the first round or did make it out of the first round that weren't expected to were teams like, Boston getting knocked out in the first round. I nailed, even though it wasn't against Tampa. The Florida Toronto matchup I got wrong despite it being a different round. Um, St. Louis getting to the conference finals, pretty laughable looking back on that. But all in all, again, this is kind of what's fun about making these brackets. They're usually going to be pretty goofy. Um, Sometimes you get lucky and get some good guesses, but most of the time they're just for fun and kind of getting other people's opinions on them is enjoyable too. So, gonna run through that today. Using this site I actually discovered, it's called Bracket Fight. So if you guys want to check it out, you can kind of create bracket templates for whatever you want. They have a partnership, I guess, with Tier Maker, so you can take Tier Maker tier lists, populate the images from Tier Maker over to Bracket Fights, and use those images to create your bracket. So that's what I'm doing here with one of the NHL Tier Maker tier lists. Yeah, let's jump into it. So, going to start with the East on the left here and the West on the right. Go Metro, Atlantic, Central, and Pacific. So, my one seed in the Metro is going to be Carolina. Some of this will be a bit tied to the power rankings, but it's not entirely based on the power rankings. So, I do think Carolina is going to be the best team in the Metro this year, followed in second by the New Jersey Devils, and third, the New York Rangers. So, we are hopefully going to get a rematch of that Devils Rangers series that we saw this year. Frankly, would not be upset at all if we saw that again. I think that, 7-game banger this year probably be the same next year. So would not be upset at all if that was the case. Moving into the Atlantic, I do have Toronto as the top seed in the Atlantic, followed by Tampa Bay. And where's Tampa at here? Tampa Bay and the Florida Panthers. So the Atlantic obviously is kind of a hot button topic with all of the competitive teams, a, staying competitive, the ones that made the playoffs last year, and then B, some of the younger teams like Detroit, Ottawa, and Buffalo, all being pretty competitive. I guess I'll spoil it now. I do have Buffalo as the fourth team from the Atlantic. I don't think there will be 5 Metro teams this year. But I do have Buffalo as the wild card 2, meaning they will play Carolina. I think Carolina will be the best team, not only in the Metro, but in the East. And then I have Pittsburgh up against the Maple Leafs. So that's my East for the first round, and we'll kind of go round at a time here. So we'll leave the East B for the time being and move over to the West. So my number one seed, both in the Central Division and in the Western Conference, is going to be the Dallas Stars. I guess maybe another kind of hot button or hot take here, if you want to call it that. But I do like the moves that Dallas made in the offseason. Obviously, Jake Ottinger is turning into a stud. Their goaltending in general last year was pretty good. Their depth up front keeps getting better. Robertson is going to keep getting better. Hintz is going to keep getting better. Picking up Matt Duchene on $3 million is a really, really solid pickup by their office. Their only real question for me is back on defense, and I think they're going to probably shore that up at the deadline. Is their one big addition? Who that might be, I'm not sure, but I do expect Dallas to be the best team in the West this year, barring, Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl doing their thing over in Edmonton. The second and third seed in the Central, I do have Colorado and Minnesota. I just really don't love a lot of the other Central teams this year. Winnipeg would probably be my first man out in the Western Conference, and they'd probably be fourth in that division, but I look at teams like Arizona, Nashville, St. Louis, and Chicago. I just don't really think they're there. Nashville could definitely prove me wrong. Obviously, they have UC Saros and net. They still have Roman Yossi, but their forward group doesn't really catch my eye all that much. And then kind of on the flip side for St. Louis, their forward group I think is pretty solid, but I'm not a fan of their defense. And obviously, everyone that has watched my videos knows how I feel about Jordan Binnington. So this is my three Central teams. In the Pacific, it is going to be Edmonton as the one seed. And then I think my 2-3 is probably just going to be Vegas and LA. Vegas obviously not making a lot of big changes after their cup win, aside from losing Riley Smith and I guess Jonathan Quick as the backup. But aside from that, not any huge losses. They managed to maintain Ivan Barbashev. They re-signed Aiden Hill, so obviously two big keeps there. And yeah, I just think these two teams are going to be solid all year round. They're kind of these three teams in the Pacific. I feel like are all kind of in that boat of they can't coast through the regular season, but I think it's pretty much a given that they're going to get in unless, LA's goaltending really lets them down. I guess you could say the same about Vegas, but I think Logan Thompson kind of showed us what he's capable of last year, and that's, if Aiden Hill falters to begin with. So I think those two teams are pretty secure despite some of the, potential questions you could ask about their goaltending. And then the two wild card teams. So for me, the West is kind of interesting. There are a lot of like middle of the road teams. Um, for those of you that watched my power rankings video, you'll be surprised by this pick, but I have the second wild card as the Seattle Kraken. If you look at the rankings, I did have Winnipeg above the Kraken on the rankings, but I just don't love Winnipeg's roster. I think Seattle's defense is a bit more rounded out. And then the big question for me is like, do Hellebuck and or Mark Scheifele move? I think there's a good chance they do. If I'm Kevin Cheveldayoff, even if I'm in a playoff spot, I have a really hard time hanging on to those two guys, knowing that they're probably not going to resign in the offseason. Unless they're, way up the standings. Like if they're first or second in the Central, obviously that might be different. But if they're a wild card team, or even if they're the third seed in the Central, I just don't see them keeping those two guys. It'd be a huge loss for those players to both walk in free agency for nothing. So I think if Chevy is on his game, he'll probably look to get pieces back for them and probably make a trade at some point in the season. So that's the main reason I don't have Winnipeg in there. I think, based on their roster composition today, I probably would take Winnipeg over them, largely because of the Connor Hellebuck factor. But for the time being, going to keep Seattle in that wild card two spot. And then my wild card one might surprise some people, but I do actually have the Flames. This would be a dream scenario if this comes true. If we get the Oilers and Flames and the Devils and Rangers in the first round, that would be an absolute banger. Um, but I think the Flames are just due for a bounce back. Markstrom had a bad year. Hubert only got like 50 some points, or 60 some points. Like he's not a 50, 60 point player. A lot of their players are going to look to have bounce back years. And then you expect big years out of their guys that are looking for contract extensions or, free agency signings in the offseason. I think a little bit of a different boat for the Flames than the Jets. Like obviously Lindholm is a big one. But the other guys, I mean, Hannafin's, don't get me wrong, like Hannafin's a great player, Backlund's a great player, but they're not Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuck. Say what you want about Scheifele, but Hellebuck in particular. So I think if they're in a spot, they're going to be competing for it. I think, obviously, they have a goalie that's signed there long term. They're not moving him. They have a great young goalie in the works. Frankly, I could see them moving on from Dan Vladar to bring in another piece, whether that's another forward. I don't really see them bring on another defenseman, but nonetheless, I do think Calgary makes it in. And again, if this happens, I would love to see that Battle of Alberta matchup in the first round. Okay, so on to the actual first round matchups. I had some notes and stuff for who I thought was going to make the playoffs. I have no notes, nothing prepped for the actual matchups, just because, if it gets to this point, I'm correct. I should probably play the lottery. So first matchup, Carolina against Buffalo. I don't think too much of a question here. The one thing to be said is if the Sabres do make it in, it means Devin Levi probably worked out, which could be a little bit scary for Hurricanes fans if this matchup were to happen. But I do think Carolina would get by if this was the case. Obviously, super stacked team, kind of all around. Two real good goalies, plus a pretty solid third string goalie as well. So shouldn't be any issues there. Devils, Rangers. I like the Devils again in this matchup. I think they only got better in the offseason. I think there's a decent chance they land a goalie at some point in the season if Vitek and or Akira Schmid aren't working out. So I like the Devils here. The Leafs and Penguins. We always know what happens to the Leafs, so I'm going to go with the Penguins. No, in all seriousness, I do think the Leafs get out of the first round again this year. And we'll see what the second round brings them. The Lightning and Panthers. I think the Panthers actually get by in this one again. I think the news of Spencer Knight, you know, feeling a little bit better after being in the player assistance program last year, feeling like he's probably ready to go for this year. Um, that's a huge add for them if he's able to get back and be on his game. So I do like the Panthers here. I like some of the moves they made in the offseason. If Ekblad and Montour can get back healthy quickly, they're going to be a bit more of a juggernaut than I otherwise thought. So I'm going to go with the Panthers there. And then gonna hop back out west. So the Stars and Kraken, I do like the Stars in this one. Again, Jake Ottinger has proved to be one of the top, 5 to 7 or 8 goalies in the league. And I think Dallas just has too much depth. They'll probably outmatch Seattle really all over the ice, though, as we saw this past year, it would probably be another pretty enjoyable series. The Avs and Wild, I'm actually going to go with the Minnesota Wild here. I think by this point, Philip Gustafson will be the full-fledged starting goalie for the Wild, and I think Kaprizov's finally going to have a year in the playoffs where he like truly takes over Connor McDavid style of series. I like some of the young pieces they have coming up too. Matt Boldy, hopefully Marco Rossi makes an impact this year. I know I made a comment about that last year, and it didn't really happen this past season, but hopeful to see him get some more time. Brock Faber is going to get some more time. I just like some of the pieces Minnesota has. I think they're one of those teams that might struggle to get in, but if they can get in, kind of like the Panthers this past season, you probably don't want to deal with them. Um, Oilers and Flames. I like the Oilers here. I think this very well could be the year McDavid and Draisaitl really crack through and get a really, really deep run. And frankly, as much as I think that the Flames have a good shot at making the playoffs, I don't think they can make it all that far. I think they have lost a lot of depth. And I think, on the back of Markstrom, he's going to be playing 60 to 64 games most likely, unless he falters, which if that's the case, they're probably not making the playoffs. So all in all, I just like the Oilers getting past the first round at the very least. And then Kings, Golden Knights. I'm actually going to go with the Kings here. As much as their goaltending scares me, they're another team that I could see making a move in the offseason, or excuse me, before the trade deadline for a goalie if theirs is not panning out. And really, aside from their goaltending, I have a lot of confidence in this team. They're one of the best defensive teams in the league last year. Obviously, they add Pierre-Luc Dubois. I think what they sent out for Dubois kind of nets out that trade offensively. But I think their scoring's still going to be fine. They're going to be solid defensively, and hopefully that helps their goaltending. And if one of the two, of Phoenix Copley or Cam Talbot, works out, great. If not, they're probably going to make a move that makes them even better. So I like the Oilers, or excuse me, the Kings. All right, on to the second round. We get a rematch of the Hurricanes and the Devils. I do think the Devils get by this time. I think they probably learned a lot in their playoff experience this past year. I think it was Jack Hughes on 32 Thoughts from the media day in Vegas was talking about how they were kind of riding the emotional high from the Rangers series going into the Carolina series. And then we kind of saw what happened from there. I think the team as a whole is going to mature. They obviously have some more pieces. Frankly, I like their group of defensemen better, even though they're a lot younger coming into this year. But um, I just like the Devils roster a lot. I think if I had to pick my favorite to win the cup coming into this year, probably a hot take because they're goaltending, but I really like the Devils roster. So I do have the Devils making it past Carolina into the third round. Leafs Panthers. Uh, this is a tough one again. Leafs fans are probably cringing just looking at this, having to play the Panthers again. Um, I do think the Leafs get by this year. I think I've had the Leafs getting by the second round for like 3 years in a row on this now, so maybe this is a curse. But um, I think the Leafs have gotten to a point where it's like they just got to get it done, man. They have the maturity now. They got passed around. Congratulations. But I think they're finally at that point where like something has to give. Obviously, Nylander's on the last year of his deal, so this is potentially his last crack at it with this group of guys, which should be a motivating factor for him if the money alone is not. Um, Samsonov has the net to himself. I think Joe Wool is going to end up getting time. I don't see Martin Jones getting a ton of playing time this year. So if something happens to Sammy, hypothetically Joseph Wool can go in. I think he's a good young prospect and he will be fine there if he has to step in. So yeah, I think just as a whole, I like the Leafs a bit more than the Panthers. This is definitely one obviously I could see myself getting wrong though, and the Panthers could kind of step on them again, but who knows? But yeah, Leafs in this one. Out west for the second round, the Stars and Minnesota Wild, a rematch of this year's first round series. I don't see the Wild getting past Dallas this year either. I frankly just think Dallas has too deep a roster. Um, the goaltending matchup will be closer than I would have thought last year with Gustafson and Ottinger, but I think Dallas just has a lot of pieces up front. I mean, Robertson even struggled in the playoffs a little bit before he really got going, so I think if he can, avoid that slump to begin the playoffs, they're going to be even scarier than they were this year, and they made it obviously to to the conference final. So we'll see what happens there. But I like Dallas's roster. I think they'll be okay in Minnesota. Probably a 5 or 6 game series. If I'm being completely honest. And then the Oilers and Kings. This would be the third year in a row that these guys have met in the playoffs, and I think it's the same result the third time over. Um, I think this potentially is the year that McDavid just completely wills their team to the Cup Finals. Obviously, last year was their second year in a row losing to the eventual Cup champions. They lost to Colorado in 4 in 2022, and then obviously to Vegas in round 2 in 6 games, I believe. So I think this year is just going to be like the league's getting stomped by McDavid and Draisaitl, especially come playoff time. I don't see anyone slowing them down. I think Stuart Skinner probably got some good experience from his playoff run too. Obviously, he was a bit shaky last year. I don't anticipate him being that bad again this year in the playoffs. So, um, yeah, I think Edmonton's kind of one of those like stars aligning moments, and I think they get by the Pacific as a whole pretty easily. Back out east for the conference finals, the Devils and the Leafs. Man, this is a tough one, honestly. I like both these rosters a lot. The biggest thing for me, really, for both of them is like kind of at times shaky defense. Less so for the Devils, frankly, just because they're young and we don't know what they're going to be like. They could be worse than the Leafs. They could be better. Obviously, the Leafs do not have a Dougie Hamilton on their roster, which changes things quite a bit. Um, I think I'd probably go with the Devils here, to be honest. It's going to make the Leaf fans super happy, but I just really like this roster a lot. They're super deep up front. They have a lot of just spread out skill. They can throw 4 lines at you and they're going to be fine. Not that the Leafs can't do that too, but I think the Devils, specifically lines 2 and 3, are just going to outmatch the Leafs. I know the news out of camp today is Nylander's probably playing center, which means one of him or Tavares could potentially be on the third line as a center there. But how many times have we seen this experiment with Willie at center? So I don't know whether or not that sticks. Even if it does stick, I don't know how much of a difference that really makes. Um, yeah, all in all, I think A, there's a good chance the Devils have a new goalie here if they get this far. And B, I just like their roster composition as a whole a bit better than the Leafs. So we'll see. And then out west for the conference finals there, this one's tough, man. I mean, again, I really like Dallas's roster as a whole. I think they have probably up front better depth than Edmonton does, but um, I probably take Edmonton's defense over Dallas's. I take Jay Ottinger over Stuart Skinner, but at the end of the day, I think one of these years, whether it's this year, the year following that, whatever it may be, McDavid and Draisaitl are just going to go on a streak that no team can stop. Um, and frankly, if I'm quote betting on that for this roster, I don't think that's a bad bet. So I am probably going to take the Oilers to get past the Dallas Stars. If that happens, it's going to be a grueler of a series. Going to end up a lot more physical, probably than Edmonton wants to deal with. And frankly, it might be more low scoring than some people might think. But I do think the Oilers could get by in that series, which would lead us to the Devils and the Oilers for the Stanley Cup final. This would probably not be all that low scoring. I think this could be a lot of 5-4, 5-3 games across the board. Obviously, both teams have the ability to score goals in bunches. And again, I have this internal debate of if the Devils get this far, either Vitek or Akira are playing very well, or they picked up someone the likes of Connor Hellebuck or, maybe John Gibson and he has a bounce back year or something like that. I don't know. Um, but my thought is their goaltending's probably better, but on the same token, Stuart Skinner's probably going to have to have been pretty good to get the Oilers here too. I know last year I had them making it to the Cup final and losing to Carolina. Um, I guess this year I'm going to flip that mantra and I'm going to have them win the whole thing. So this would probably be a super fun to watch, like 6, 7 game series, bunch of goals either way. Um, but I think we're kind of at that point in both of McDavid and Draisaitl's career where eventually they're going to make it through. And I think there's a good chance they do that this year. I mean, they all summer, every year for the last 2 years, really now, have been saying it's kind of cup or bust for them. Two best players in the world. They've kind of shown that they don't need a ton of pieces around them to make it work, but hopefully guys like Evander Kane, Zach Hyman, Darnell Nurse, Matthias Ekholm are all healthy. Another year of Evan Bouchard becoming an even better player than what he showed last year in the playoffs. Maybe Jack Campbell bounce back. Stuart Skinner's going to grow. Um, so I like the Oilers as a kind of reasonable pick here. Um, we'll see what happens though. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Obviously, some of the spicier takes are just going to be about these teams making the playoffs, whether it's Buffalo over the likes of Boston getting omitted here, Ottawa getting omitted here, um, Winnipeg not being over here on the West. So let me know what you guys think down below. I know not a ton of people do this before the season. There's a lot of it once the playoffs start. We know what the seeding looks like, but I think this is always just kind of a fun little thing to do before the season starts. So yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe as well. It is free, and we will catch you on the next one.